This is the Left in the Forgotten Borough podcast. I'm Andrew Savage.
I'm Nancy Richards, and this is the our end of the year last podcast of the year,
Yeah,
right?
and it is Sunday. I forget there's all these memes about how the time between Christmas and New Year's is like a void where time doesn't exist. And so I had to be told that it was Sunday. I just didn't I forgot.
Twice I tried to call somebody today thinking they would be at work, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's Sunday.
Yeah,
So
it's
I'm not sure
Sunday.
who did.
I had forgotten, and I'm wearing my favorite Christmas gift that I got this season, and this is a shirt for our listeners who are not watching. There's a, it's on my shirt. It's a picture of Donald Trump dressed as 90s Monica Lewinsky, and it says Donica Lewinsky on it. It's from my brother, my
We'll
sister-in-law.
put Donna Karen
Yeah, but so yeah, it's and it's
or
the
Angelica Houston.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Yeah, actually, well, like Morticia when she was Morticia. But no, you know what? It was referencing earlier, not the Epstein files that have been coming out over the last couple of weeks, but it was actually earlier this year. There was a trove of documents dropped by the House Oversight Committee from the Epstein estate, and in one of those emails, it references from Jeffrey Epstein. I think it was to Michael Wolff, the author. He says. Does anybody have that picture of Trump blowing Bubba? And everybody's been on the hunt to figure out who's Bubba, but the internet and Instagram has figured out that Bubba was a nickname we used to call Bill Clinton. So everybody's thinking that Donald Trump blew Bill Clinton, or he blew a horse that Ghislaine Maxwell has named Bubba.
Hey,
Named
Bubba.
Bubba. Yeah. And so either way, it's not a flattering thing, but uh one of the many chaotic aspects of life in 2025 under Donald Trump. And my theme to, kind of round out the year is, if you listen to our podcast from last year, I was much more sullen. I was much more uh, pessimistic about the future of American democracy. I'm ever so slightly more hopeful heading into 26 because just from all appearances, Donald Trump is much weaker than I anticipated he would be at this point. I was very surprised by how quick that took a downturn. Uh, for a number of reasons. He said he would basically improve the material conditions of most people as far as their economic situation is concerned. That hasn't happened, and in fact, in many ways, has gotten worse because of tariffs and because of other whimsical and nonsensical policies that he's put into place that have made things a whole lot worse. But it's also been the uh, survival of and the endurance of the Epstein story. I didn't think it would have the kind of resonance that it has. And it has it in a way that I think, it's not just one big trove, it's just sort of drip, drip, drip.
Hot news.
It's just kind of drip.
It's
It's drip, drip, drip. I think that's the worst kind of
what's in
scandal.
it, what's not in it, who's in it. You know, it keeps people distracted from what's really going on. It's um I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it. Of the Epstein story. It's like when you have something to tell me significant. Look, we all know what this man did, and it was horrendous. But when there's something to really reveal, then so be it. I don't want his girlfriend released. I think we need to keep that on the front burner. That
And
that she doesn't get any.
put her back in a maximum security prison.
Yeah, in regards to that, I want to hear more from what the women are saying as opposed to, what are we like reading between the lines kind of stuff. And is there something we can do about all this redacting? If not, then let's talk about what we can do to combat Donald Trump because I feel in regards to this year, I'm depressed. I'm depressed. I'm sick of watching another ICE video, detaining someone and getting away with it, pulling people out of cars. I'm sick of seeing that. I'm sick of seeing um watching, that 60, did you see that 60 minute story that was pulled from 60 minutes? Did you watch it?
See, caught? Yes, I did see it.
Yeah. And that's horrible. Like that's the kind of country we are, and people in this country support that. I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed of who we are as a people. That's disgusting that we are allowing people to be detained, being put in camps in other parts of the world with no due process. They haven't done anything criminal. Many people have been coming to this country and they have been doing it the legal way. And this presidency has turned this around. We've had an immigration problem, and he's used it to create this racist. Uh, it's disgusting, and that has just made me depressed. I'm in more in debt than I haven't been in years. Um, I give half my payments to my credit card, and then they take like a third of it in interest, which is ridiculous. Uh, I can't get out of debt. It's hard to make ends meet. I don't know where people are cheering about prices going down because prices aren't going down. I'm still paying the same amount of money for gas. And if you're going to like, it's 20 cents cheaper, that's not, it's 20 cents cheaper if you look for the right gas station. So what are we going to do now? We're going to invade countries to bring down the price of gas? Is that what we're going to do? We're going, we're going to invade Nigeria. We're going to invade Venezuela, so we can go get their oil reserves and then bring down. And people are going to be okay with that as long as their gas is cheaper. These things piss me off. Um, and this president is getting away with it. So I'm depressed. You're a little bit optimistic.
Which is
I'm depressed.
usually that's not the case. Usually I live in the land of gloom and doom, but but I've seen some signs of life from democracy over the past year. One, I've just been focused on the pushback from different communities and places around the country, places that you would never expect there to be pushback. There are protests in Alaska. There are protests in Montana, in Idaho, pe places that are deep red that are protesting.
That it's impacting them because people aren't stupid. They know if, for the most part, but because it's probably impacting them greatly.
Yes, it has. Uh, and so I think that we've seen signs of life from democracy in different ways this past year. We see, at the beginning of the year, I was sort of sullen about,
Well, there
where
was the
things,
inauguration in January. Uh,
yeah,
that whole inauguration w was a sign of times to come. If you look at like the guest list, all of the oligarchs who were there,
front row,
front
front row.
row, and
Mhm.
and seating, and Trump's speech and his tone. He set a tone right from the get-go that, I'm here and I'm angry and I'm going to take it out on the country and wah 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 wah. And he did right from out of the gate. He started his retribution like right away. Um, detainees started in March. Like that, remember that plane that went to El Salvador? That
Yes.
was in March. So that was like immediately. He started going after brown people in regards to let's get rid of the Latinos so they don't, you know, vote. To be honest, I think that's why we're detaining so many people and getting rid of so many people because they're afraid of, whites being, no longer the majority population in this country.
Well,
Because we
that's something that people like Tucker Carlson and others have promoted for years. That's called the Great Replacement theory.
Well, it's
And
like a Christian nationalist thing happened, like Stephen Miller. Like I've heard him publicly make comments that I'm going, what? Like, the right people or who's coming and, like blatantly saying like who are good people and who are bad people. And it's pretty much on race.
Well, Trump said, why can't Trump said recently it was something he said in his first term at a cabinet meeting, but he said it more publicly this time around a few weeks ago at a rally. He said, why can't we have immigrants from Norway and Sweden and those kind of places? And the through line of those places that those are majority white countries. And so, and he said we have to accept these people from shithole countries. He said it again a couple of weeks
Right.
ago. And so I think that's a fairly obvious through line, but something else to be happy about, or at least, not so sullen about as it relates to retribution, is that it hasn't entirely worked. I would say, political prosecutions of people like Tish James and James Comey have failed spectacularly at the Justice Department level. A few of his U.S. attorneys had to resign. Alina Habba, his most vocal U.S. attorney in New Jersey, had to resign because she was illegally
They
appointed
put
as determined by the courts. And
But they're
so
putting in idiots, and what kind of government are, like, I just see that that leads us to be vulnerable, because while this idiot is doing things like this, China and Russia are, sitting on the sidelines eating their popcorn.
they
And,
are. Well, I think I'm of two minds about that. I think that's probably the one thing that's, saving us right now is that their malevolence is also outflanked by their stupidity. These people are very stupid and they can't, and their incompetence, and that's probably what's saving us at this point from becoming full on fascist and dictatorship, is because these people are so dumb. And so I'm all for, dumb. I'm all for dumb because dumb means that we could potentially have a chance to get out of this. But certainly a lot of damage has been done, particularly when you think about Doge. That was a big thing at the beginning of the year.
yeah,
Um,
February Doge, the whole famous chainsaw with
yeah,
Elon Musk. I
yeah,
was listening today, like 200,000 people have been let go. Somebody said it was the size of the city of Madison, Wisconsin, if everyone lost their jobs.
yeah. Across different departments, public health has been decimated by RFK. The CDC, the FDA, none of the preeminent medical institutions in the entire world are no longer to be trusted. They are no longer to be listened to with any degree of credibility because they are run by conspiracy theorists who have no proof or no factual evidence to support what they say is true about vaccines and among other different issues. And so that's one area that's been completely decimated, and I'm not sure how we get that back to a place where people believe and trust them
But
again.
if we don't have people in place that are astute to, maintain, like one of the biggest threats this country is going to be biomedical. COVID, they're talking about in regards to how COVID was started. That was a severe pandemic, but are we ready for another biomedical, disaster?
Well, there's
Because we're
one.
not paying it, because we're not paying attention to it. We're,
Well,
you know, he's building weapons, but is he building a strong biomedical defense? Is he doing things like that?
well, he's
No, because he's stupid. He is not thinking about stuff like that.
well, biomedical threats are being caused by this administration's stupidity and incompetence uh, and just lack of regard for any kind of established scientific fact. I was just reading that people may have contracted measles at airports because,
Because people are not getting vaccinated.
yeah,
And they were saying, when they looked at the amount of children that died from the flu were children who didn't get vaccinated from the flu.
yeah,
So, I got the flu last week, but I also got a vaccination. But I am not in the hospital with the flu
yeah.
um, because I'm vaccinated. And, we need to remind people that with COVID, when I think about all the people that died, in COVID. My cousin's husband died. He was physically, he couldn't handle that, he couldn't physically handle it. But if he had a vaccination, he might have had some sort of a shot at, a survival. but he didn't have it because it wasn't available yet. So, yes, we still got COVID, but we didn't die from it as frequently as we were. Um, and the same thing with the flu.
No, yeah. And
Um,
I think certainly another area that's been impacted, just by the chainsaw and Doge is USAID has really been decimated, and the impact of which has been felt around the world. And USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, is something that was established to assert America's influence and power around the world without military means.
like
And
the Marshall Plan.
yeah, and to help other people so they are more inclined to be allies with us and to be more inclined to work with us in areas that are of interest to us. And that has been completely decimated, and people who are suffering with HIV around the world, which was something that George Bush
Well,
cared about very much,
Donald
they
Trump
also suffered tremendously.
Donald Trump, is saying how like Christians are being, killed in parts of the world, but the fact that he's gotten rid of U.S. aid, he's probably killing more Christians around the world because, they're not getting the assistance that they need to survive. So, instead he's going to go in and do airstrikes, which, I'm not necessarily, that's a horrible group that's in Nigeria, the Boko Haram. So they're creating havoc. But I don't believe he didn't do it with the grace of Nigeria. So I, I'm I'm not necessarily sure about his tactics, but
Well,
that
well, he's
not
got,
having aid, um,
yeah, the
that's going to
US,
kill more people around the world.
yeah, USAID is gonna not having a formidable presence from USAID. It's technically still around, but it's been worn to a little nub.
When you think
And
about Christians, like he's in this denial of climate change. But, we think about in July, the floods in Texas. That went in and that was that Christian camp where all of those children died
Mhm.
in that flood. Um, and think about all of the the crazy weather we're having, and we have someone in our leadership now who is denying that there is any, problems with climate. And so we're not putting anything into combating that. And so we're just going to have more floods. Nobody's going to, you can't even get insurance in Florida anymore because of all of the hurricanes. So it's going to be more difficult to maintain a home. Like things like this. The president doesn't care. He doesn't
No.
care. He brings troops in DC. I mean, so if you look at this year, he brought troops in DC, and then of course in LA and Chicago, and now we're starting to see ice in New York. Um, and we have still, school shootings. Always are having, the last one at Brown University. We still have school shootings. My only high was the fact of the elections this year, that there was, you know, people did go to the polls, and it did reflect in the polls. So that was some sort of a high for me.
Yeah, well, it's reflected in the polls, and I also see signs of life, in as whimpered as they are. I do see some signs of life in our institutions. I do, as I mentioned before, grand juries declined to indict Tish James, clearly a political prosecution.
You've said that. Yeah.
Yeah, same with James Comey. I'm also seeing the gerrymandering push that Trump initiated with those calls, with the call to Greg Abbott to find him 5 seats in Texas. That has also backfired, seemingly, at least for now, because Indiana Republicans rejected their attempts to rig their maps. That's for one. Utah also was given a Democratic seat by the federal courts. Their gerrymandered maps were challenged in the courts, and the federal courts said this is not a fair map, and so you have to go back and draw a Democratic map, and so they did. Virginia is drawing 3 more seats on their map. Maryland is looking to do the same. So are some other states. And so, at least for now, that has not only stopped, but it seems like the Democrats have the upper hand, which is rare for us. And so I see some signs of life there. But I also see
Like a
signs,
trickle.
yeah, I
It's
see,
like, it's like someone, like a guy with a bad prostrate. Like he peed a little bit, not a
yeah,
lot. It's no stream yet. So I'm waiting for, it's a trickle.
yeah, and I also see signs of life as it relates to limits on Trump's power. Actually, right before Christmas, there was the Supreme Court said that he could not send troops to Chicago. He could not send the National Guard there, and
The Supreme Court said he could, it's okay that ICE could actually, pick up people based off the fact they speak Spanish. So, I'm not exactly happy with that Supreme Court
well,
decision.
no, the justices who made the most recent decisions about Chicago were the three liberal justices, but also the two who joined them from the conservative bloc were Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett. So it was a 5-4 decision in favor of him not sending troops to Chicago. And so uh, I also see signs of weakness in just how he has decided that only the executive branch matters. Trump, as it relates to Epstein, Trump was forced to capitulate on the Epstein files to Congress, and usually it's the other way around. Usually, Congress usually capitulates to him, and he was forced. He knew he was going to lose that vote, and so he gave in. He gave
Yeah.
in, and so he gave in,
But
and
then Congress voted not to do anything with health care.
no, no, yeah, and so
So they're not doing anything.
yeah,
So, like
well,
I said, it's a trickle. It's like a man going to pee with a bad prostrate. He got a little pee out. That's it.
yeah, well,
That's what you're happy over a little pee. I want to stream, you know.
well, you are. I think the difference between you always talk about the world as it should be. I'm more, as it is, and I think that this is what it is, and so we have to. And experts on authoritarianism say that you have to look at those moments and repeat them as much as possible. I think one of the things that people like Anne Applebaum and Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who are the foremost scholars of authoritarianism, what they say is you have to look at the opposition in like things like the No Kings protests, which there were two this year, one in June, one in October.
That was a shining light. That was a
Yeah.
good thing.
And I think that I actually got a text from the organizers recently. They say there's going to be another. There's just no date or anything like that yet, but um, that's certainly going to happen. That's going to come up soon. And I think that's a bright spot. It does show just the level of opposition there is in the country, and that's not something you often see reflected in the media. And as far as the Democrats are concerned, I think the Democrats have had to reckon with, the kinds of people who you're talking about, the people who do minimal or nothing, and that's why you see all these primaries popping up all over the place. You see in New York, there are several. Actually, in New York, there are several heavy hitters who are retiring. Nydia Velasquez is retiring in Sunset Park. And then you had Jerry Nadler, who's retiring on the west side of Manhattan. That's his district. But then you have other people, like two people who've been on this podcast before, Brad Lander and Dan Goldman, are now running against each other for CD10 in a primary.
Right.
And that'll be really interesting. And I wasn't necessarily read in on a lot of the local issues in that primary, but I spoke to some people, and they said basically that people are unhappy with Dan Goldman because of APAC funding him a lot of the times, and just because of his what they see as a cozy relationship to developers, real estate developers in the area. And so that's what catapulted this challenge from Brad Lander, which is not a small challenge. He's been endorsed by Mamdani, he's been endorsed by Bernie, he's been endorsed by Elizabeth Warren.
And in
So
New York right now, that's a good thing. So
yeah,
maybe it wouldn't matter so much somewhere else. So that's going to be an interesting race.
yeah.
Uh, but let's look at, how is our race going, challenging Nicole Malliotakis, um, how is that going? Troy McGee is a great guy. How is his campaign going? Is he getting his message out there? Is he, presenting a strong candidacy to defeat Nicole? I I do not, sometimes I feel Democrats on Staten Island is we don't really put forth a candidate because they're like, well, we're not going to win anyway. You know, that's not true. You have someone like Max Rose, who had someone like Lori Honor behind him, like doing his campaign. He won, you know, he,
He won a
he
pretty
can do that.
robust, he
Do we
won,
have that force behind Troy McGee? You know,
he had, well, Troy McGee is not the only Democratic candidate from what I hear. I hear that's going to be a
well,
primary
he's the
from what
only
I
one
see.
that's put his name in the hat right now. So as far as I'm concerned, he's the only Democratic candidate.
Well,
So people can talk all they want, but who else has actually officially said they were running? No one.
well,
So
there's
we're either going to stand behind him or we're not.
Well, there's going to be a primary, and actually, the county had their meeting recently, and they did not endorse in that race because they expect a primary. And so they expect a primary from other challengers. Troy is the only one whose name is currently in the ring as a declared candidate, but there's Michael DeSillis, who has also been on this podcast, who will very likely, I think, jump into the race. And he's actually, I would say, if I had to guess, just kind of the orientation of where he is, he's probably the more left-leaning of the two, as far as him and Troy. But there's also a wild card of Justin Brannon potentially getting in. And I think if he gets
You've been
in,
mentioning that for a while, and
yeah, he's
is
gonna.
that happening? I don't know.
Well, he's also just licking his wounds. He was also a candidate for controller, so I think he's just kind of,
How
seeing
long
what
are you going to
what
lick that wound?
happens.
Get in the race already if you're gonna do it. I mean, she is the incumbent, and there is a strong Republican Party on Staten Island, and we've been spending, Malay Mondays. We've had more protests in front of her office than I've ever seen before, ever. And so we should be putting someone forth to defeat her. Come on, like how many times have we been in front of her office protesting what she's been doing? I've never done that so much of that ever. And, once in a while I've stood in front of the congressional office to oppose something, but not like we're doing now. People want her out. Let's get her out. She's
Well,
horrible.
well,
She
yeah. Well,
didn't go for health care.
well, she,
So
she's, you have to go through the primary process first, and we'll see who makes it out. And I would say probably just from having spoken to both of the candidates, I would say Michael DeSillis is definitely the more aggressive of the two. And if Justin Brown gets in, I think that's it. I think he wins it, and at least the primary part. And I think he's a very strong candidate if he does get in. He's run uh, higher than the top of the ticket in his district, which is that's also another hard district for Democrats.
yeah.
And he's also very good at talking to people all over the spectrum. And so I always say, don't discount him yet. And he's got the time and he's got the luxury and he's got the money to wait and see what he wants to do. And so the other candidates don't have that as much. He's got a little bit more options as far as financially, and he's also a bigger name. And so we'll see how that race determines and plays out. There's also another factor in our race as well. We have a couple of legal cases around CD11 here in Staten Island. There's one lawsuit that's been brought by Mark Elias, who was the lawyer for the Democrats in 2020 when Trump was trying to flip it legally. And he is doing that on the basis of race. He argues that the current maps, as drawn for CD11, excludes Black and Hispanic voters. And so he's making a civil rights case for that. And that's going to be moving through the court system. And we'll see where that lands. And just more broadly, the Supreme Court is taking on, or they've taken on, they're going to issue a ruling at some point in the spring. They're going to issue a ruling on what's left of the Voting Rights Act. And so, uh, my guess is that they're probably going to gut whatever remains,
Rest of it.
yeah, of the
The
Voting
most
Rights Act.
important act that came to this country is the Voting Rights Act, and we've gutted it. It's just I'm just so ashamed about what we've become and what we have allowed to to deteriorate. That is probably one of the most important. Actually, in my argument, it is the most important thing that came in this century as far as what's been passed. And the history behind the injustices that African Americans have faced to vote in this country. Um, you know, they talk about free and fair elections. Nicole Maiotakis and Republican parties, free and fair. Put a mirror to your face and look at what we've done to certain groups in this country to prevent them from actually voting. And now we're doing it by we're going to, get rid of the Latino population by, deporting a lot of people. So you know, I hear from people they're saying if they're making immigrants, the Democrats want immigrants here so they can vote for Democrats. You can't vote unless you're a citizen. So what are you afraid of? That someone here who's Latino who becomes a citizen will vote for the Democrats? Is that what you're afraid of?
Well,
Then
that's the
have better
great,
policies.
well, that's the great replacement theory. That's been something that's been talked about for many years. It's sort of, it used to be considered fringe, but that is what is mainstream now for the Republicans, is talking about that kind of thing in those terms.
I mean, I don't know if this is, what here we're discussing in regards. I thought we were doing a year in review podcast today, but I mean, immigration is a big part of what has happened in this country this year. It's been on our, like, I think immigration, tariffs, um, tariffs have definitely impacted the economy. Um, prices are haven't gone down, and our president doesn't notice the fact that his economic policies are not helping, and he insists that they are, but where? Where are they helping? Where are they? You know,
Well, he's doing what he does whenever he is caught in a moment that doesn't work for him, and he tries to warp reality to his will. And that is when he says, "Oh, the affordability is a democratic hoax." But yet, I would argue that affordability is why he was reelected in the first place. I think people, and I'm not talking about the MAGA hardcore, I'm thinking about the people who swung for him of the more independent variety. They voted for him because they remembered the 2019 economy before COVID. And so I think that's what it was. And so I would just say, no, it's not a hoax. And in fact, it helped him get elected, and he hasn't lived up to that promise as far as making people's economic conditions better at all.
a little under the assumption, if heard this once, I heard it 1,000 times. Well, he's a businessman, so therefore we're just going to naturally do better. But does anybody remember what kind of businessman Donald Trump was?
He's a
He
con
used,
man. He's not a
he's a con man.
businessman.
He used the legal system to get out of to get out of business deals that he didn't do well in. He was able to claim bankruptcy, and who was the fall guy? His employers, people who he didn't pay. He was legally, how many people didn't get, their paychecks for building one of his casinos because he was legally able to sue and walk away from things and declare bankruptcy. And are we a country that values people who cheat? Because that's what I'm starting to think, that we're okay with cheating as long as we get ahead. Um,
Well,
it
this
reminds me of the people who drive on the right side of the shoulder now. It's like They can no longer sit in traffic, but they have to drive on the right shoulder. And do you know who those, that's the new phenomenon driving in Staten Island, is you have to now look to your right because there are people coming driving on the shoulder because they're too good. And, you know, it just boggles like this is the kind of society that we live in.
Well, I
It's
think Donald Trump, I think part of the reason he was put back into office is because Joe Biden was a much more traditional politician. He did not feel the need to be in our faces every moment. He did not feel the need to operate the presidency as though it was his own reality show or a form of entertainment. And I think people had grown used to the Trump style of doing things
he
because,
should have left. He should
yeah,
have did his
well,
4 years and then
yeah,
gave the opportunity for someone else to come in because Joe Biden did do a good job.
yes, he did.
In 4 years, he did do a good job. But then the whole thing about is he, is he too old? And I think that ruined the election.
Well, I think that Trump is falling into a lot of the same traps that Biden did. He talks about sleepy Joe Biden and Joe Biden this and that, but
And now there's
he's
things of
falling
him
into
sleeping.
yeah, well, he's falling into the same traps. He's sleeping in public
He's
places.
ranting. He's doing these weird. Did you see the Christmas message?
Oh yes, we're radical left
Merry
scum.
Christmas. And
Radical
even
left
to the
scum.
radical left scum.
Hmm.
That's what he wrote.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas to all, even the radically left scum. Like, that's embarrassing. That's our president. That is the leader of our country
Oh,
for
I'm
saying
past.
stuff like that.
Oh, I'm
Speaking
past.
of, can
I'm
I,
past the
I
point
was
of
keeping a
embarrassment.
running list and I stopped and I found this today. These are reasons why Trump should not be president. One day I just kind of did a free write, and this is what I had on that day, which was a few months ago. The first of all, the grift with John Jr. With Liberty Financial. He pardoned a CEO who gave him a $2 billion deposit, and he pardoned that CEO. The online betting company Calsy is the only one that has access across the country to do online betting. They gave like a contribution, like another grift. He pardoned the January 6th people. Prices did not go down. Eggs and gas, to me, it's still expensive. The stock market is still the same. He's saying it's the highest. No, it's not. It hasn't dropped, but it's definitely not soaring. Tariffs, the election fraud. Um, he's still mentioning that there was an election fraud.
To an 8 year old,
Epstein,
to an 8 year old kid, actually, when he was talking to them for Christmas, he said, "Oh, we won 3 times, Pennsylvania." No, they didn't.
yeah. I mean, how many times he has lied to, like, he just says things that are factually not true and nobody calls him on it. The Kennedy Center, well, at the time, I just said he fired the board. Now I can add on that he added his name to the Kennedy Center. I didn't watch the Kennedy Center honors. I wouldn't do it. Doge and, what destruction that did. Health insurance, all of our, even us who have a good health insurance policy, we're paying more as well. He invited the Saudis here. The comments like the piggy thing, the Comey and Letitia Dame, that whole thing. Um, saying things like Democrats should be put to death. You know, that
Well,
was just one day. That was just
I was
one
going to
day.
say, I was like, how much time do you want to spend on that list? We'll be here all night. But I would, yeah, I'm a little bit more, you know, despite all that he's gotten away with and all the destruction that he's managed to wrought on this country over the last year that he's been back in office, he's still, relatively speaking, I would say, in a much weaker position going into 2026 than he was.
Well, I think
Um,
people are starting to realize that
yeah.
he doesn't give a crap about them. Look at Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like, who would have
Well, yeah.
thought she'd be on the bingo card? Look at Elise Stefanik. I'm not positive, but I think that woman realized that no matter what she did, he was not going to pay her back. You
No.
know?
Well, and you know, I would I never thought I'd see the day where Marjorie Taylor Greene and Elise Stefanik were on the outs with Trump, but Nicki Minaj is now in the inner circle apparently, and so
Yes.
and
Well, she wants a
so
pardon. She wants
yeah.
a pardon for her boyfriend or husband. I'm not sure who it is, but
Yeah, and so I was always Team Cardi B anyway, but I I was always Team Cardi anyway, but
I just sad that people are doing that. Like you're selling your soul. So someone gets
well
it's
he's
sad.
well he's an extremely transactional person, and I think a part of the mythos of Trump from the very beginning is, well, he's got his own money, he can't be bought the way that other politicians can. Well, clearly he can be, and he has been.
And people
And
have been buying him, throughout and he just does it out in public. It's his grift is right there for all of us to see. So yeah, he is transparent. He's
yeah.
transparent that he's a thief and he's doing it right in front of our faces.
Well,
And we don't care.
Kara Swisher, actually, when I went to go see her at the Pivot podcast live in November, she was saying, because she knows all these tech people, she's been interviewing them and covering them for many years, and she's saying that, you know, for now he's just giving these tech people what they want, and that's why they're cozying up to him. And she was funny. She said if Kamala Harris won, they would have changed their pronouns to they them. Like if it would have gotten them what they wanted.
Yeah.
And so she said they would have been all for DEI and pronouns if Kamala won, because it would have given them what they wanted. And so
Well, look at
he's nakedly transactional. So I think that's why it
look at
works.
the media companies, like what's happened to CBS. Like I I know CBS is a mainstream, but when you think about,
Not
the
anymore, it's
history of
not.
well, when you think about the history of this country, and I think of good night and good luck, and like the whole like uh, when you think
The
I think of
concrete.
I think of CBS News and 60 Minutes. I mean, these are established. They're journalism. It's journalism, and they don't cover everything, but I trust them. But now when they're cutting things because it's going to offend the president. Um,
And we knew this was going to happen when the Ellisons took over Paramount, and which owns CBS, and when they installed Barry Weiss into that
because
position.
yeah, because
And
they want to do mergers, and it's disgusting. You
the
know,
merger in question here, just for our listeners, the merger in question here, the reason they pulled the Seacott story, I believe, was to curry favor with Trump, who at a rally a few days earlier said, "Oh, well, they're still not being kind to me on 60 Minutes and CBS, even though there's new owners, and they want to." Uh, they're battling it out, Paramount with Netflix for control of Warner Brothers.
right.
And why does Trump have an interest in Warner Brothers? I'll tell you, because Warner Brothers also owns CNN, which he wants to turn into Fox News 2.0. And Larry Ellison, when they took over CBS, privately told Trump that he would work on making it more Trump friendly. And so they want to do the same to CNN. And so they're doing a hostile takeover attempt because Netflix has outbid them, at least as of right now. And so they're trying to do a hostile takeover by appealing to shareholders directly, to do a hostile takeover. And they're relying on the fact that Trump's FTC and Justice Department would have to approve the merger. And so uh, Ellison has been saying to the shareholders, well, we have Trump's back, and we have Trump's back, even though he has not said that publicly. And even though the Netflix CEO met with Trump to say, stay out of it, basically, let us handle it.
You have to have an independent media. You have to. Yeah, it's the same thing like with
And the
the
regulators should be independent too. There should not
yeah.
be considerations about political interests as it relates to whether or not to approve a merger. The only thing that should be in consideration when we're talking about approving or not mergers is whether it's going to eliminate or reduce competition. And or is it going to be a monopoly by forming this merger? Are we going to have a monopoly? That's the only consideration that should be at the heart of what these people decide. And I think actually that, fits into perfectly with the affordability conversation because I think affordability, despite all the riz that Zoran and others have given it, there's actually the actual conversation I find about affordability and what actually keeps prices down and what actually creates a more equitable economy is actually pretty boring and it's more nuanced than what a campaign would be allow for, I think. And Lena Khan, who is the chairperson of Mamdani's transition team, was also the FTC commissioner in the Biden administration. She blocked a lot of really harmful mergers that would have increased prices much more, particularly in groceries, actually. That was her most famous blocking of a merger, was there was one that was going to increase prices somewhere in the West Coast because it was a chain out west. And so she blocked that merger. And those are the things that do uh, make prices higher and what does impact the economic material conditions of most people. It's
And look,
actually a much more boring conversation than
look
what
how
a
much
campaign would
subscriptions
allow
are,
for.
you
Yeah.
know, and even with ads, 14.99 a month, and these things add up
Yeah.
in regards to like what we're paying and what we're not paying. Um, but it's all grift, and this is this presidency, and we seem to be okay with it. On a better note with media, it was nice to see that people came out in protest against Jimmy Kimmel this year, when he was going to be taken off the air. And people, got rid of their Disney. They got rid of their Hulu subscriptions, and they went out into the streets and they protested and they forced him to go back on the air. And I found that as one of my, we look at the year like highs and lows.
That
I
was a
saw
lot.
that that was a high, and it
Yeah.
was a high because because us as a people, this is where democracy takes place, where people came out and they showed their outrage and put pressure, and he was put back on the air. That
Yeah.
was a high for me. So that's where I see democracy is still in place. Um, and the No King's Day, that definitely. What were your highs and lows this year?
Well, a high for me was definitely the Jimmy Kimmel backlash to that, and actually, Jane Fonda. We talked about it in my class. Jane Fonda reformed the Committee for the First Amendment in response to that, and a lot of different people signed on to it. So that was one. I think a recommitment to our founding ideals. That was part of why that Jimmy Kimmel moment broke through. Uh, I would also say, like I said, I've said a few of them already, but I would say a lot of the highs have been the big high for me is that Trump is not as almighty and all powerful as he claims to be. And it's sort of like that moment in Wicked when Elphaba discovers that the wizard has no actual power. Uh, and,
Mhm.
and that's what this is, for me is that, this guy still, and he's becoming more feeble. He's becoming more oatmeal brained. He's becoming more.
That last thing to the American public about talking about the screaming, the 18-minute scream
Yeah.
fest,
Oh my God.
yelling at us like, why don't you see how good I am?
Yeah.
I'm the best. It's
Yeah. Well, if,
hysterical.
if he thinks that's a winning strategy, just yelling at me to say the, deny my lived reality and experience, that's not a good strategy. Um,
What was your lows? What would you say your low is this
Oh, I
year?
would say a low is definitely the embrace of political violence as a way to solve problems. I think we saw that with the execution of Melissa Hortman and her
Yeah.
husband in Minnesota. That was a horrible thing. And, of course, the murder of Charlie Kirk a few months later, that was also a
And
terrible thing.
CEO Luigi,
Mangione, yes.
remember his name, but we don't remember the
Yeah. The,
because what there was a good point someone said they've replaced, like political violence, healthcare is horrible by getting rid of that CEO, by killing him. They've only put another person in his place. There's another CEO there.
it's a cog in
So,
it's they're a cog in the machine.
yeah.
That's what it is. And so it doesn't actually solve the problem. And I'm not quite sure, the trial hasn't happened yet in that case, so
Right.
I don't know what like his defense is actually going to be. It appears that that's the issue, just the inequities and the unfairness and the predatory nature of the insurance industry. But I don't know what his defense is going to be for that. But I just thought, just the embrace of violence as a way to solve a problem is definitely low, and it's been happening not just in 2025, it's been happening for many years now.
Look at
Certainly,
all the people
yeah.
shooting,
Yeah.
definitely. Having drills is now just as normal, as used to having, shelter drills, like bomb drills back in, when
Mhm.
I went to school. So
Yeah.
the whole idea, the acceptance of gun violence in this country is, um, and being overseas and people, wondering like they really think this is a dangerous place to be, you know.
Yeah.
People are, especially, I go to Ireland often, and they they don't quite understand our use of guns and how bad it is.
Yeah.
And also they don't understand like how we elect who we do. And um, but definitely I would say that it's definitely a low, the use of, from the low for me is ICE and how they are, grabbing people. I would rather have people being, putting more people in the court systems to do more processing. There was a good point made, I heard recently. We talk about like Ellis Island, and when people talk about oh, my parents came here the right way and blah blah blah. Your parents came through Ellis Island and they didn't have a visa. They came with a name of a place that they could go to,
Yeah.
and they were simply processed and checked. The processing was done right there. We don't have that anymore. So we don't spend money in that type of processing. And and we needed employers back then. We needed people to work. So we were letting people in. And we still need people to work in certain fields that Americans aren't working in. It's not because they're taking jobs away. It's because we need, you know,
Yeah.
people to work in those jobs. And so to me, that's my low point is what ICE has done to a lot of people in this country. And, they're abducting people who are citizens. And the way they're going about it, when we were talking about Sarah last week, how she was picked up and she was moved like 5 different places. And she had a lawyer, but think about all of the people who have been abducted and people don't know where they are. Like that's that's cruel. Like you family members can't locate where their family members went. And there are a lot of people, they're not criminals. And they're not criminals. And I look at her ad, Homeland Security, her ad for ICE, and the first face she puts up there is a man with tattoos all over his face because she wants us to think that this is who the immigrant is the man with all those tattoos, that MS-13 person. And I also learned that when they showed all those MS-13 people, that wasn't even the people that they captured. It was just like they took a photograph
It was cosplay. It was total cosplay.
yeah.
And it was total cosplay. And, from what I hear, she's basically on her way out because they don't like, although she's done everything they want her to do, which I don't, why
Well,
they would want her out. But I think there's other,
as
you know,
as people will learn with him, he's not loyal to anyone except his family, like his kids and himself. And that's it. But that was my biggest low. I think my high was, the King's Day, Jimmy Kimmel coming back, and then the election of Mamdani, which, we will see, he's going to be,
yeah.
inaugurated on New Year's Eve. So,
Well, he's
and so that's my high. So,
Yeah, well,
and
that was also another high of mine is just the elections um, in November of this year as kind of a form of pushback. And, Mamdani's was important, but also, and especially because, at least for me, like I was walking into 2025 thinking Andrew Cuomo would be mayor. because every poll had him at the top. I heard local leaders tell me, that it's resistance is futile. We might as well just, ally ourselves with him. He's going to win. But what I was really heartened to see is that in New York City, people were not afraid to say that we wanted better, and that Democrats said we wanted better than that. And they did so in resounding fashion, not once but twice. And uh, so I was really heartened by New York City and how they responded in this moment to uh, demands of affordability. And we'll see how much he can do because Eric Adams is working to stymie him on his way out the door with a lot of his midnight moves, like replacing members of, certain boards. So this way it's harder for him to
Yeah,
do.
like the midnight judges from
Yeah. Oh yeah, Marbury
Adams,
versus Madison. Yeah. And
but
so we'll see what he can do, but he just made a really good appointment actually of the fire commissioner, the person who's going to be the leader of the FDNY.
oh, I saw that. I just realized I have background music on. Is that distracting? I
No,
just
I don't hear
realized that it was distracting.
I
All
don't
right, good.
I don't hear
All right,
anything.
hopefully
Yeah.
that won't distract the recording. I
Yeah.
forgot I had some Alexa off.
Yeah, I don't hear anything.
All right. So, but all right, now we'll notice that there's a difference. Yes, he appointed a new fire commissioner.
Yeah.
Um, from she was an EMT person, right?
Yes. And I think her name is Lillian Bonsignori. That's what I'm looking at right now. Lillian Bonsignori. Uh, Representation also, experienced person, but also a member of the LGBT community. Of course, Fox News is having a field day with it. Um, because
Oh,
they're always, they care so much about qualifications. One of their weekend hosts is now running the military, so
right.
so they care so much about
Well,
qualifications.
they're going to say that she's not a fireman, and
Yeah.
but the
Well,
FDNY is both EMT and
yeah.
hey, that might be a bad move, that might be a good move. We'll see. You know what I mean? But the
Well, the
EMT,
Well, the undertones of that, and I'm paraphrasing what I think they mean by all of this is, well, you shouldn't have picked that big dyke to be the FDNY head. That's what the undercurrent there of the Fox News headlines about it. That's really what it's about. Not so much about whether she's actually a firefighter or not. It's more homophobic than that.
well, well, the fire department, it's taken a while, but they've had a lot of problems, being more diversified and in accepting, and so maybe this is a sign that things are changing in that department. We'll see. Um, and
Yeah.
ho- and that the leadership and I was listening to someone and they were saying in regards to her leadership style, she's I don't know if the conservative is the right word, but she was definitely very organized. I think of like
As lesbians are.
so
Like I
so
like
that's
when people said, "Oh, she's not qualified, she's DI or whatever," I was like, "Listen, I would trust a lesbian to do open heart surgery on me. They are notoriously efficient. They
no,
will,
okay.
they say that there's nothing more efficient than a lesbian with a set of keys." And so,
I
yeah,
hope so, yeah.
I hope
So,
so. Yeah, I think she'll do a fine
but
job. And the
they were
one,
thinking like in regards to like how like the police commissioner in regards to her organizational style. They were thinking because she came out of retirement, I believe. She she head of the EMT? She was like chief of department or something from the
yeah, I don't
EMT.
know
She
much.
had a big prominent, she was a prominent role and she did a very good job doing that. So, it's nothing with DEI. She ran a good,
Yeah,
good ship. So,
yeah. Well,
um,
I don't know much about her background, but I'm interested to see. Oh, excuse me, what some of the other appointments are, who he ultimately picks for
I
school
think he's
chancellor.
sticking with the school chancellor for
I,
now. We
I
haven't
think
heard
so.
anything new. I
Yeah.
haven't heard any buzz of anybody new. So
Yeah, he was considering some other people. I know, Jamal Bowman, who was a big campaign surrogate for him, that he was on the list. So was Rita
I
Joseph,
hope
who was the
not.
chair. Yeah,
I
no, I don't want Jamal Bowman either.
want someone that's there. That
Yeah, and
you know,
I don't want, and Jamal Bowman, in fairness to him, he was a longtime principal before he was in politics. So he does have the experience, but he's a little bit too radical for my taste in a lot of ways. And when when you're a teacher and you're working in the system, you don't want somebody who's necessarily going to burn every bridge.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Teaching is it's a lot more conservative than what people think. You know, there is a consistency. I know like working on Staten Island as a teacher. One of the, people say, oh, Staten Island has good schools. I think the thing about Staten Island was a little more conservative, but it was a little more consistent in running. And sometimes that works. And I see where it doesn't work, where they're not introducing new ideas can be sometimes, falls flat. Um, but otherwise, kids need to have a place to go every day and feel safe and with consistency, this as a teacher, then they begin to learn, they like right now I'm subbing and I'm taking over a maternity job. And right now the kids don't want anything to do with me because they're so used to their other teacher. They're not happy that I'm there, but their other teacher had a baby. So
yeah.
she's out. It's like, sorry guys, but so I understand the kind of pushback for me, because they're used to seeing the same person every day. And
Well, yeah, well,
that.
as far as the chancellor is concerned, my thing is, I know this is mainly from a teacher standpoint. It's not necessarily what parents or other stakeholders might say, but I, is she going to leave us alone? And is she going to be fair as far as contract negotiations that's coming up in the spring? Uh, is that going to go well? And so I think, she's demonstrated an ability to be fair and to do all of that. And
So
so,
far, I haven't seen a major, you
yeah.
know,
I only interacted with her once. I interacted with her at a summit for GSAs in the fall. And so she seemed perfectly fair and capable. And, I hope he retains her at least. And the UFT is lobbying Mamdani to do that, from what I understand. And so just a highlight is just elections, not just here in New York City, but across the country. I was really concerned coming into 2025 about New Jersey, and whether they would ultimately flip as far as their governor is concerned. And there were a lot of reasons to be concerned about that. Trump, that was a state that swung, even though he didn't win the state, it still swung very much in his direction. In 2024, Kamala Harris only won it by 5. Um, and in 2021, Phil Murphy barely hung on, barely facing the same guy that Mikey Sherrill faced this time,
right?
and barely hung on. And so there was reason to, be concerned about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was really happy with Mikey Sherrill's performance because they did a county by county breakdown, and, a lot of the ones that Trump got.
Gained more counties, yeah.
She
She
also
did.
got. And so I was really happy about that. And it shows that and I'm not talking about the MAGA core, I'm talking about the people who swung in his direction from a more independent perspective may realize that they fell for the bill of goods, just like his contractors did, just like his banks did, just like his workers did. He's a con man. That's what he does. And just like the Republican Party has to a large degree, with the exception of, Marjorie and
Just
Elise.
hope he doesn't burn it down. I just hope he doesn't burn this country down. I really don't. I'm hoping what you said earlier, like people are starting to realize, and I hope they don't realize too late. So,
Well, I think I'm fairly bullish about what I think. I do predict the Democrats will win back the House in 2026. The Senate map is more
We should
difficult.
win back the Senate too. We should win both back.
I hope so. I want them to, but the Senate map is more difficult. But I would say that there are strong candidates in places that maybe we should look at. I think Mary Peltola is an excellent candidate in Alaska. That's a seat that's up. I think she would be terrific there. Sherrod Brown is running again in Ohio. The senator from Wyoming, Cynthia Loomis, she's retiring, and I think maybe the Democrats and maybe the independents, even though that's a state that's fairly conservative, I think maybe
Chuck
they,
Schumer's not leaving.
well, his term is up in 28, so we'll see what he does there. But I would say for in Wyoming, because I think Democrats have to, in certain parts of the country, they should have a 50-state strategy, but they should do what works in those places. And so I think, somebody who, if people are really having buyer's remorse as it relates to Trump, now that the senator from Wyoming is retiring, maybe somebody to think about running there is Liz Cheney. And
That would be great.
um, somebody
Well,
who's,
let her come back as senator,
yeah.
but
And so
she'll
I,
be Republican.
well, she might be, well, she might be an independent. And there are places like in Nebraska, there was the guy, Dan Osborne, who was an independent.
Bernie's an independent.
Yeah, he's independent but left-leaning, the guy in Nebraska. I think Liz Cheney could maybe pull off something like that there, especially people are having buyer's remorse about Trump. She was sort of sounding the alarm for many
Yeah.
years. And so I think, we have some good possibilities and some good candidates. In Texas, Jasmine Crockett is running, and so is James Talarico. I like Jasmine Crockett a lot, but I think Talarico has a better chance of winning the state than she
Yeah,
does.
I like her a lot too, but I think that's going to be a it's going to be a tough race for her to win. But I would like for her to win. That would be beautiful for that to happen. So I was just going to say we are kind of running long here. So
Well, it's been a long
do-
year, so it's been a long year, so
well,
it's
I was
apt.
going to say to kind of pivot into our ending. What do you hope for 2026 going into the new year? What
Well,
do you would like to see?
I hope for the success of the incoming mayor, Zohran Mamdani. I hope, as Donald Trump said, that he proves a lot of people, even the people who are his skeptics and critics, wrong. I hope that the Democrats take back the majority in the House and possibly the Senate with a commanding majority. I hope that Donald Trump's power and his gravitas continues to weaken. And I hope we find more. I don't think the Epstein story is going away. I hope we find out more about that. I hope in these drip, drip, drips that there's more to come from that. Um, I am hopeful that institutions will hold and prevail in 2026. They've been strained, they've been stretched, but I think that they will ultimately prevail. I think people, uh, especially with things like Kimmel and other things, are recommitting to a lot of the founding ideas like free speech and like democracy and like uh, economic opportunity. I hope that those things continue. What about you? What are you hoping for?
Well, I hope. Well, I hope Madani does well. I hope that really some of the new innovative ideas. I hope he does well. I was gonna say I hope I lose weight and find a boyfriend. That would be nice. But I always wish for that every year. So
Well, that's
that,
me too. My GLP-1s will help with the weight, but I
yeah, we're
would.
all doing that. So so the price that my price for my weight loss drugs will remain affordable. But that's because I have, adequate health care. But well, for 2026, speaking of, I hope that healthcare people aren't going to lose their shirts over,
Mhm.
deciding whether I'm going to be able to eat or have health insurance. Um, I hope the markets are stabilized. I hope the 2026 elections, we gain both the Senate and the House. I hope that something happens that kind of halts what's happening with ICE, some form of uh, justice where people have some like allow phone calls, allow where people are. People like are calling ICE the hotlines. They can't even find where people are. That just in that aspect, I'm really hoping we do better with this whole process of immigration. I hope that that changes.
Well, I
I don't
hope.
expect it to because of who's in the administration, but I hope pressure we can, because I see this year that if we put pressure on the administration, things can change. So I hope the American people will put pressure on the government to really make it more fair in regards to how we're going to deal with immigration. I hope Congress passes something substantial that's really going to help us out, you know, as opposed to just, having, deadlocks where we have to shut the government down. I hope we can really, I want to start seeing Democrats and Republicans working together somewhat. I miss that. Um, I wish Nicole Malliotakis does not get reelected.
Yeah,
That's what I would really like.
yeah. Well, as far as
Um,
ICE is concerned, I think the advantage of having Democrats in the control of the majority in one or both houses is that they could defund it. They could
yeah.
defund ICE, and they could pass a budget with severely reduced funds for ICE. And so I think that's certainly a lever that can be pulled to make the situation much more humane. But I also think, if they're going to do that, they have to offer an alternative as it relates to immigration. So what is, not that they want to give Trump a win on the subject, but at least propose something.
And I don't know how, but how are credit cards able to charge 26%? That's just robbery.
Hmm.
How is that able to happen? I don't know. Congress, but they don't do anything lately. So they haven't passed anything of substantial except not, making healthcare more affordable. And Nicole Malliotakis did not vote for that. So, um, I know she was on some sort of caucus thing that was trying to
Problem solvers, yeah.
problem solver, but problem solvers, it didn't go through. So she didn't solve that problem. But that's what I hope for. I want affordable health care for Americans. I want, uh, you know, Congress to work and become a viable branch of the government again. Um, that would be nice. And less violence, less violence.
Hmm.
Um, that would be nice. And if I could lose a little weight, that would be great.
Hmm. Well, on that note, this is the Left in the Forgotten Borough podcast. I think we've got one more episode coming this week. So I was going to say Happy New Year, but we'll have one more episode before the new year. So this is the Left in the Forgotten Borough podcast. I'm Andrew Savage.
And I'm Nancy Richards. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year, even though we'll see you later in the week.